Clapper board. You're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled, Human Males Don't Eat Their Females During Mating Season. Alien Girl Shocked. HFY. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. The night the sky broke open over Vraxxan's 4, the storm came down in sheets like torn black sails, lashing the basalt mesas until they bled seams of molten orange. The air was a taste of metal and old thunder. Sensors screamed in every language, and the ground shook with the blunt certainty of things ending. In the middle of it, a single human stood on the lip of a shattered ridge, as if testing the storm's patience. The Vraxxans had dug their warrens under the rock for 1,000 generations. They had hunted one another in mating frenzies to sharpen the bloodline, carved wisdom on the bones of the consumed, and stacked the dead into pedagogy. To live was to win, to love was to devour. They did not pray, there was only survival and the ritual teeth that guaranteed it. Tonight, survival looked like running, but the human did not run. Zhera was young by the measure of her people, her crest a blade of dark emerald, her eyes silver like the edges of knives. She had fought in the sand pits and in the glow caverns, survived her first mating season by breaking the throat of a larger rival and worn the honor rings of 2 hunts. She knew the mathematics of fear and the geometry of ambush. And she knew, by every equation of this moment, that the tall, soft-boned alien on the ridge was a fool. Yet when he shouted through the storm, she obeyed. Down! He roared, and his voice cut through sulfur and static like a flare. He threw his body in front of the charge tunnel just as the first Chyr drones crested the ridge, silk-bright carapaces flexing, mouths unfurling into pet-ailed grinders, war songs rippling along their shared nerves. His rifle barked a string of white heat. Zhera, stunned, raised her tri-blade and sidestepped into the old instinct, aiming for the mind sack behind the first drone's left eye cluster. She felt the soft give, the wet pop, and then the world was all metal dust and chitin. Someone dragged her by the shoulder into the tunnel. The someone was the human. Up close, he looked even more fragile. His hair was rain-plastered to a face scored by tiredness, his armor thin and scuffed, a small strip of cloth tied around one wrist with inked lines that meant nothing to her. His eyes were a strange warm color in this bitter stone, a rust-sun brown. He grinned. "Welcome to Requiem Outpost," he said, as if offering her a drink. "Name's Eli." Zhera hissed by habit, a sound like a hot blade quenched. "Zhera," she said, "of the stone spear clade." "Zhera," he repeated as if testing the weight of it. "Good, stay with me." Offense flared up her crest. "I will not hide behind you," she snapped. "My claws have taken 20 Chyr heads." "Then make it 21, he said, rolling into the tunnel mouth and firing again. "I'll handle the counting." Later she would remember the absurdity and feel something that was not laughter but practiced its shape. The battle was ugly work in the narrow tunnel. Drones squeezed through in glossy ropes, the tunnel becoming a throat gagging on teeth. Zhera moved like a thought, cutting where cutting mattered. Eli laid down precise bursts, weapon coughing and hissing as it overheated. When his rifle went dry, he drove its butt into a drone's mandible with a piston's rhythm. It should have been his death, his armor tearing like fruit skin, but he danced back, caught his heel on a rock, and nearly toppled. Something old in Zhera lunged, a survival impulse that did not belong to her alone. She caught his collar, hauled him away from the grinder mouth, and severed the drone's neck. The shared tremor of almost death passed through their bodies like the aftershock of lightning. "Thanks," Eli panted. "Let's not make a hobby of that." They stood in steaming silence as the last drone spasmed and stilled. Requiem Outpost was a crater of broken things, slagged fortifications half sunk in ash, signal towers bent like melted candles, hasty graves marked by improvised stones. The storm outside had quieted to a snarl, the sky oiled black and streaked with the faintest green aurora. Zhera's ears rang with the absence of screaming. "Where are your packs?" Eli asked, already moving down the corridor with a limp he did not permit to be called a limp. "We're regrouping in the core bunker." "Dead," Zhera said simply. "My clade fell at the salt ridge. The storm split us. I followed your flare." Eli's face did something subtle that she later learned was sadness held still. "I'm sorry," he said. There was no performative grief in it, just an acceptance so steady it felt like weather. She disliked how that steadiness made her want to believe. In the core bunker, a handful of humans and Vraxxans hunched over a tabletop map projected from a jury-rigged drone brain. The map flickered with errors. The power cells were coughing their last. Eli introduced Zhera as if they had already passed some private test together. "Zhera Stone Spear," he said. "She fights like she writes the rules. She's with us now." A wiry human woman with a long scar down her neck, callow, nodded once. A bruised Vraxxan male clicked approval. Someone handed Zhera a canteen. It tasted like metal water and something sweet she could not name. The sweetness was shocking, like kindness. Callow jabbed the map. "Chyr hive clusters converging," she said. "They're growing a queen mind in the ravine. We either hit them now before it's coherent or we dig our own mausoleum." "How many?" Eli asked. "Enough," Callow said. "Too many." "Then we fight like we intend to live anyway," Eli said, as if reading the first line of a scripture. Zhera watched the way the humans stood around him. They were not pack in the Vraxxan sense, no dominance bite, no head tilt of submission, but they oriented to him. If leadership is a gravity, he was heavier than his frame. "Your species," Zhera said to him, low, curiosity chewing at her like a small animal. "You do not kill your mates when the time comes." He blinked at the shift. "What time?" "Mating season." She said it as one might say monsoon or dustfall. "We fight. The male proves worthy, the female devours, the strongest clutch survives." A handful of the nearby humans froze, then carefully did not look at one another. Eli's mouth opened and closed. It was almost comical. "That's vivid. It is necessary. We don't do that," he said finally. It's complicated, but we typically try to keep the people we love breathing." "Love," she said, tasting the word like foreign fruit. "You trust them not to steal food, to watch your back. Why keep them alive after their usefulness?" "Because they aren't tools," he said, brow furrowing. "They're people. We're stronger together than alone." "Stronger by not consuming strength." She tilted her head, crest lowering in skepticism. "Stronger by believing we owe each other," he said. "By making a promise and keeping it even when it hurts." "Promise," she repeated, and her crest made a small, involuntary ripple. "A softness that becomes a blade." "Sometimes," he said, "sometimes it's just a hand to hold in the dark." They didn't have time to wrangle philosophy. The alarms began as a low moan and rose to a thin, brittle scream. The hive had decided to become a storm. The bunker breathed in panic, the tense, sharp smell of creatures about to be prey. Eli's voice cut through the fear, trimming it to something that fit in a hand. "Positions," he called. "We hit their nerve cords, not the teeth. Zhera on my left." "On your grave," she snarled automatically, the old Vraxxan battlefield vow that honored both life and death. He grinned. "Let's put that off." The ravine was a birth canal carved into the planet itself. The Chyr had silked its walls with glistening threads. Eggs throbbed in the stone like luminescent tumors. The air was a blend of perfume and rotting metal, so sweet it turned vicious in the mouth. Zhera's heart ticked faster. It was not fear. It was the old season rising in her blood. Fight, claim, consume. She looked at Eli. He checked his magazine, flexed his hand, and glanced at the sky as if asking it to be reasonable. "Stay behind me until it's stupid to do so," he said. "I will not," she said reflexively, yet she found her body aligning to his anyway. They moved as a shape, humans with their short, fast weapons, Vraxxans with long knives that folded like articulations of night. The drones poured like a spilled hive. their shared mind not yet coherent enough to be cunning but already cruel enough to be thorough. Zhera felt the pleasure of cutting. She saw Eli step into a gap that would have chewed his thigh and let a drone graze his armor to draw it into a line of fire Callow had set. It should not have worked. It did. Where Zhera would have bitten, Eli blocked. Where she would have leapt, he steadied. It made her furious and vivid and very alive. "Why do you keep placing your soft body in front of my blade?" She snarled once, breath sawing, blood from alien and self slicking her fingers. "Because you're still breathing," he snapped back, "and I'd like to keep it that way." "This is foolishness." "Probably." He smashed a drone's eye cluster with the heel of his hand in a motion that looked like old training and something learned in a bar fight. "But it's what I've got." They reached the nerve cords at the ravine's heart, ropes of luminous tissue pulsing like the throat of a singer, tendrils already thickening toward a queen mind. Callow slapped a charge onto the largest cord. The Chyr shuddered, an earthquake made of hatred. 30 seconds, Callow said, voice a calm in a hurricane. 30 seconds is a century when things want you dead. 30 seconds is a vow. Zhera put her back to Eli's. She could feel the heat of him through armor and the tremble of his muscles standing their ground. She thought of the old lessons scored on bone, consume or be consumed. She thought of the sweetness in the human canteen, the way it shocked her with its useless kindness. She thought of the word he had offered like fire in rain, promise. "Hold," Eli said, as if he were telling the planet to wait. They held. The charge ripped the ravine open. The queen mind's beginning ended mid-breath, a stillborn tyrant dissolving into light. The drones spasmed, their song cutting out like a throat slit. Silence afterward was not empty, it was swollen with the absence of death. The team staggered back to the bunker with the slow wonder of survivors. They made soup from rations and melted storm water. Humans joked badly banter as life support. Vraxxans clicked and hissed and pretended their hands didn't shake. Zhera sat on a crate, watching heat ghosts rise from the pot, and tried to look at the human without being caught. Of course he caught her. "If you stare any harder," Eli said, "I'm going to get insecure." "I am studying," she said. "Studying what? How you make yourself not die. Your body is poorly armored. Your bones are hollow-seeming. Your blood pressure is absurd, yet you live." He ladled a bowl to her carefully as if offering something sacred to a god who might take offense at being honored. "We cheat," he said lightly. "We cooperate, we forgive and try again." Forgive. The word had a temperature. "When someone fails you," he said, "but you choose them anyway." He shrugged. "Sometimes that's the only way anyone gets to be more than their worst day." Zhera sipped the soup. It was terrible. It was perfect. "We do not forgive when it matters," she said. "We devour." "How's that working out?" he asked, not unkindly. She thought of the empty tunnels of her clade and said nothing. In the days that followed, they fought and fixed and fought again. The storm-broken comms coughed back a single message from orbit. "Hold 3 rotations. Reinforcements incoming." 3 rotations is a joke to a hive. The Chyr did not laugh. The second night, Eli sat with his back to the wall, legs out, head titling toward sleep and refusing to fall. Zhera lowered herself beside him, her joints clicking softly like beads. The bunker light drew long smears across the floor. "When your season rises," he asked quietly, as if asking the weather to explain itself, "does it feel like you?" "It feels like a river remembering the way it cut stone," she said. "It is older than my name." "How do you choose?" His voice was gentle curiosity without the predatory edge of hunger. "We fight," she said with tired pride. "We test the bone and the breath, we take the winner, we make the clutch, we feast and honor, we rise stronger. And the loser becomes lesson and nourishment." He nodded, eyes shadowed, not judging and not agreeing. "Humans, we have our own mess, but we try when we love to build something bigger than hunger." "Your males," she said slowly, almost groping for insult and finding only wonder, "do not eat females. Your females do not eat males. You join and you keep breathing." He smiled crookedly, the scar on his lip catching the light. "That's the goal." Alien, she muttered, heat along her crest. The strangest thing your species does is live with the ones you value. He glanced at the sleeping humans and the watchful Vraxxans. Strangest thing your species does is survive by breaking your own heart. Perhaps, she said, a day later the hive tried fire. They poured napalm analogs into the tunnels. The rocks sweated and screamed. The bunker air turned to knives. They had to abandon the lower levels or cook. Eli led the retreat with a voice like a rope. Zhera carried a human who could no longer use his legs. Callow's hands blistered on a hot ladder rung. She didn't let go. Every corridor felt like the last one. Every stair promised to break under a weight it was never meant to bear. At the top, the outer storm had returned, as if the sky had been conscripted by the hive. The night pumped red veins through black cloud. They staggered into a world that wanted to unmake them, and it was absurd and enormous, and they kept going because not going was a hole with teeth. On the ridge, the drones formed a wall. The wall moved. Zhera's breathing became a drum. The season inside her bared fangs. She wanted to leap, bleed, taste. Eli lifted his hand with that simple, unmilitary softness she had learned was his most dangerous weapon. She held. On my mark, he said. Callow, flare, Vraxx team, left flank, humans, right push. Zhera, here, she said, surprising herself with how the word fitted her. Take the break, he said. You'll see it, I trust you. Trust was a key sliding into an old stone lock. The door inside her moved. Callow's flare sliced the dark. The drones, light-shocked, hesitated a fraction. The wall became a shape with joints. Zhera saw the break, the place where too many legs tried to shuffle through the same space. She dove like a verdict, her tri-blade a comet under red rain. A drone's grinder closed on her arm. Eli's rifle spoke and its song became silence. They moved as if they had trained together for a lifetime of hard mornings. After, with the drones twitching in death and the storm tempered to a manageable rage, they found a cave the hive had missed. It smelled like old stone and something clean, water maybe. They crowded in and let their bodies come down from the ledge. Humans told quiet jokes. Vraxxans polished blood-off blades with methodical tenderness that was not love but might grow into it. Zhera felt the afterglow of killing fade and the cold of living return. She hated the cold and loved it. Eli sat near the cave mouth, watching rain ripple like a black river. He was bleeding from 4 places he did not consider worth mentioning. Zhera moved to stand there too, within conversation but not invitation. You're very loud, she said, which in her language could mean foolish or brave depending on the tilt. Comes with the job, he said. What is your job? Keeping people alive, he said simply, even when they don't like it. Do you consider me people? She tried to make it a joke. It came out like a knife thrown handle first. He looked at her with that steady weather face. Yes. She wanted to hiss. She wanted to let her crest flare in derision. She found herself doing neither. You do not even eat your mates, she said, softer than she intended, as if confessing an innocence. How do you become part of each other? Time, he said. Shared burden, saying I'm here more times than your fear can count. He shrugged. We build a life. We plant seasons together instead of bleeding in them. We try to leave more than we take. That is not how the galaxy has survived, she said reflexively. No, he said, but maybe it's how it learns to live. The reinforcements missed their window. The hive did not. On the morning of the 4th rotation, noon by a broken clock, the Chyr mind hatched in a place they hadn't seen. The ground knew before sensors did. It thrummed with coherence. The drone stopped being many teeth and became one hunger. Eli unfolded a map no longer representative and weighed it with his palm. We can't hold Requiem, he said. There's only one way we make this matter. Callow understood first. Her mouth became a line of dry earth waiting for rain. The core. Yeah, Eli said. We crack the reactor, give it our best. If we do it clean, it'll fry half the hive, maybe more. Doing it clean will get you killed, Callow said flatly. Maybe, Eli said, but doing it dirty gets all of us killed. Zhera's crest went still, the stillness of an animal sighting a trap it cannot not enter. You would burn yourself, she said without question marks. If it buys you enough time to get out, he said. And if you promise you'll use that time. Promise, she said, not even understanding why her mouth formed the word so fast. He smiled, small, genuine, not a performance. Then it's worth it. She stepped closer without realizing she had until his body heat changed the air. I am strong, she said. It was a plea disguised as defiance. I can carry weight. I can cut a path, choose someone else to burn. Zhera, he said, and her name in his mouth was not a possession but a gift. I'm choosing everyone else to live. A dozen plans began and died in the ruin of practicality. The hive was already pouring toward them. Their shadows moved like a tide with intention. Eli slung a satchel of charges across his chest and made his voice a machine that made other machines run. Callow, your evac lead, punch the east tunnel. Vraxx's team carry the wounded. Zhera, on your left, she said. Because it had become true, he shook his head once. No, on theirs, keep them breathing, that's the job. She bared her teeth, the Vraxxan version of grief. He clapped her shoulder, a warm, sharp pressure, then let go as if the contact meant something it did not have permission to mean. The run to the core was a series of last chances strung together. Doors that jammed, ladders that went nowhere, drones that arrived exactly when it hurt most. Zhera killed a drone with her bare hands when her blade stuck. Callow dragged a wounded Vraxxan by his harness with teeth bared against the weight. Eli slipped through gaps like a word that wants to be said and is maybe a prayer. In the reactor chamber, the light was an idea of dawn. It hurt to look at. The control column was half melted from storm surges. Eli's fingers moved across it anyway, coaxing function from ruin, murmuring to it like a horse. Come on, he said softly. Work with me. Zhera's heart was a hammer. The team was a handful of breath left in a broken bellows. Eli looked at her across the chamber. The drones were in the next corridor. Their song was coming like a flood the stone could not refuse. Go, he said. That's an order. She hissed viciously. I take orders from my blood. Then make your blood take me seriously, he said with a ghost of a grin. The grin had 1,000 mornings inside it and none of them belonged to her. Go. Callow tugged her. Zhera shook her off. She stalked forward with a slow, dangerous calm and fixed her gaze on Eli's. You taught me the word promise, she said, voice a hissed thread. You taught me hand to hold in darkness. Now hear my vow, if you die small, I will desecrate your memory. He blinked. That's new. You will die large, she snarled, if you must die at all. Fair, he said, which was not an argument but a confession. He reached out. For the first time, she let him touch her without flinch. His hand rested briefly against the hard edge where her shoulder met her throat, right where Vraxxans make the mating bite. It should have turned the season in her blood into a blade. Instead, the blade softened into a plow. Go, he whispered. She went. The escape felt like treason. The corridor shook with the core's awakening. Zhera could feel it in her teeth. The thing that powered life deciding to become a weapon. They ran until running became crawling and crawling became the act of insisting. The east tunnel opened to a night staggering under its own reign. The evac flare rose like a second moon. Callow counted heads. The number did not equal the names. Zhera turned back. Callow caught her wrist with a grip like a command. Don't. I will tear the drones in half, Zhera hissed. I will. You will get them killed, Callow snapped. And in the cut of that voice was a hard love Zhera had not learned yet. You made him a promise. Zhera made her mouth turn into a weapon against itself and stayed. She felt the core go as a sound more felt than heard, a vast bass note that made the planet bow. Light fountained from the ridge. The drone's song cut off mid-word. The rain turned to steam and then to fine ash. The storm hesitated, as if remembering who started it. The next morning was pale as a breath after weeping. The hive was gone, burned clean back to eggless silence. The outpost was a geometry of shadows around a hole. The survivors, fewer than there should be, more than there might have been, stood around a new absence and tried to name it. Zhera went down to the edge of the crater. Heat licked her face. At the bottom there was something small and dark. She scrambled down against Callow's curse and dug with a fury that made her hands bleed through callus. She found the small dark thing. It was a strip of cloth inked with 2 lines in a circle, worn smooth by sweat. "What is it?" Callow called down. "A promise," Zhera said. She did not wipe her eyes. "A human one." She wore it around her wrist. It did not fit her anatomy, so she tied it on her knife. The reinforcements arrived a day too late and a lesson too early. They found a Vraxxan female barking orders like they were just a language. A human officer with bloodshot eyes writing casualty lists in tidy lines. A crater that had been a hive and was now a warning. They found no body for Eli Warren. They found his absence everywhere. Word ran faster than ships. In the Vraxxan Warrens, old females clacked their jaws and said it was sentimental nonsense. In smoke caves, artisans carved new bones with new proverbs. In the drinking dens where humans teach one another to sing bad songs and better, they sang a new one about a man who traded heat for time and found a way to leave. Zhera carried the strip of cloth into the next war and the next. She learned human tactics like a second skeleton. She taught Vraxxans to fight beside them instead of through them. She cut when cutting mattered and held when holding saved. During the next mating season, she entered the circle and did not let the old river drown her. She fought her rival to the ground, showed her throat, and did not devour. The Warrens buzzed like an angry hive. "He will make you weak," an elder hissed, meaning the human who was dead. "He made me strong," Zhera said, meaning a species that refused to eat what it loved. She did not lay a clutch that season. Instead, she took a post under a human brigadier with hands like maps. She met a human female who could outshoot memory. She met a GI empath who made silence crack and spill pain out. She met so many kinds of courage that the old categories broke in her mouth when she tried to say them. Years unrolled like wire. The war widened from 1 planet to 10. The Chyr split into 7 hives that chewed separate galaxies of hate and occasionally ate each other when convenience demanded. The human-Vraxxan alliance became something less embarrassed by its own need. They built ships together, human bones, Vraxxan teeth. The first time Zhera stepped onto the bridge of the Accord, the flagship that had a spine learned from daring, she put her palm on the bulkhead and told it was real. On a moon called Glassdown, she walked with a human botanist through a grove of engineered trees that made oxygen like gossip. The botanist pointed at a bloom and said its name with reverence. "We carried this seed for 3 generations," the woman said. "My grandmother never set foot on soil. She died never seeing this flower open. I wish she could see it now." Zhera bent close. The flower smelled like something water would say if it could speak. "Perhaps she can," Zhera said, and the botanist nodded, understanding grief as a language with many accents. When the Chyr came for Glassdown, the Accord met them at the edge of the exosphere and showed them what it meant to fight for a thing that makes air. Zhera commanded a cross-species squad. She spoke through comms like a cave teaching echoes. She said, "On my mark," and the mark was exactly where it needed to be. After, as sparks drifted down like new constellations and the grove breathed on, a human pilot climbed out of a cockpit and saw Zhera and said, awed and irreverent, "Ma'am, you were a storm." "I had a good teacher," she said, and thought of a man who turned a reactor into a promise kept. Not all days were battles. Some were the infrastructure of the living, repairing, planting, knitting, arguing about minor protocols with the intensity of animals who remember starvation, and therefore fight now about bread. In those days, Zhera learned to sit by a human fire and let the warmth be something other than strategy. She learned the names of human foods and the rituals around them. She learned why people hold hands even when there is no ledge. She learned, One night when a human child fell asleep against her armor during an evacuation drill, that the body's armor is sometimes the least important kind. She told stories to Vraxxan juveniles who had never eaten a lover and therefore were considered dangerous dreamers. She showed them how to strip a human pulse rifle and grease its heart. She told them about a cliff in a storm and a man with a grin like a complication. She said his name as if calling him back from a corridor made of light. Then came the council. The Galactic Council was a theater of logic pretending not to be a stage. Beneath its translucent domes, 100 species argued in polysyllabic righteousness that often masked fear wearing a robe. The Vraxxan had never been a council people. They were too sharp, too uncooperative, too uninterested in voting unless the vote permitted a kill. Humans had been standing at the door with an application in hand for years. The council had 1,000 excuses that all smelled like slow-made disdain. They could not ignore the accord. It had too many ships, too many saved worlds. They invited a delegation. Zhera went because she had learned the language of hard rooms and what it means to stand so that others can breathe. The council chamber was all sound and glass. She wore no armor. Her crest lay flat in diplomatic courtesy that cost her something. She had memorized speeches written by people who count words like coins. When she stood, she did not use them. "You laugh at humans because their teeth are small," she said, and a murmur went up like weather moving over a shallow sea. "You say they bleed too quickly and love too loudly. You say they are unfit for the math of this galaxy because they refuse to consume what they cherish." She let that sit. On some faces she saw amusement, on others curiosity, on a few discomfort as sharp as a shard. "My people sharpened themselves on the bones of those we devoured," she said evenly. "We called it holy, we called it necessary. It made us hard and it made us empty. When the hive came, our math failed. We learned a different equation." She held up her blade, not drawn but present, and on it tied painfully neat was a strip of cloth inked with 2 lines and a circle. No one in the chamber understood the symbol. No one needed to. "This is what they do," she said more quietly, which made it travel farther. "They make a promise and then hurt to keep it. They hold rather than bite. They share air. Even in their foolishness, they construct a bridge over the carnivore river inside us." She told them a story then, the story of a small outpost and an impossible ravine, and a man who understood that living is sometimes the exact shape of burning. She did not make him better than he had been. She did not make him worse. She made him true. By the end of it, the room was not breathing the way it had been. "We did not beat the hive that night," she said. "We endured, and because we endured, we beat it later. That is the math. If you want to build a galaxy that is more than a cycle of mouths, you invite them in." In the vote that followed, the council did what nearly no one expected quickly. Of course, some did it for optics, others because they were tired of arguing. A few did it because something like the first sip of sweetness in a metal canteen touched their tongues and did not kill them. The green lights outnumbered the red. The galaxy shifted on its axis, not a lot, but enough to change a trajectory years hence. After, in a quiet corridor, an old Vraxxan elder who had traveled on a diplomatic stipend the size of a small war found Zhera and hiss clicked. "You shame our bones," the elder said without heat. "You make the old proverbs lie down like tired animals." "I make them stand up and look far," Zhera said. "Do you not miss the feast?" "I feast every day," Zhera said, and let her crest lift just enough to be scandalous. On the sight of breath continuing, the elder blinked. "You speak like a human." "I speak like a creature who intends to keep her promises," Zhera said. The elder went away muttering, which in the culture is praise. The war wound down not with a bang but with a persistent erosion of hive advantage. The Chyr are very good at eating, they are very bad at hoping. Without hope, a species is a machine that breaks at the first rust. The accord learned where to apply salt. The hives retreated to bad spaces and grew quiet. There will be more wars. The galaxy is a body with many aches, but that season of burning passed. On the day the Phoenix Accord's flagship docked above the Council world for the first formal ceremony of equals, the hangar hummed like a hive with a different song. Flags are a human nonsense that Zhera had learned to respect. The human colors and the Vraxxan crest hung side by side. The people in the hangar looked like all the words you use when you don't have a word and need to make a new one: family, tribe, accident, choice. A human drummer tapped a rhythm that was not military. A Vraxxan chorus answered with a counterbeat learned in the Hunt Caves. The two rhythms made a third thing. Children, human and Vraxxan and hybrid and foreign, ran through legs and under tables and between arguments without fear. A mechanic cursed cheerfully at a bolt. Someone burned bread. Someone else laughed at the smell with real grief and the kind that heals. Zhera stood near the big viewport with Callow, whose scar had silvered and whose hands had learned to plant as well as pull triggers. They watched the planet turn like a jewel a child would hide in a pocket and forget until it mattered. "You ever think about Requiem?" Callow asked, the understatement of a lifetime. "Every day," Zhera said. "What do you think he would say about all this?" Callow gestured with her chin toward the flags, the children, the dignitaries pretending not to be nervous. "He would say," Zhera answered without pause, "don't let them make it a museum. Use it." And then he would ask for decent coffee. Callow laughed, a sound like a weapon that refuses to fire. "Yeah, he would." A tiny human hand tugged at Zhera's belt. She looked down. The smallest of the pilot's daughters, her name an impossible cluster of human consonants, held up a ribbon she had woven with string and ferocity. "For you," the child said, jaw set with the bravery of doing something unasked. Zhera lowered to one knee, which in her people is a profound concession. She let the child tie the ribbon around the cloth strip on her blade. The child patted it solemnly. "He's not really gone," the child said, a statement of engineering. "No," Zhera agreed, the word a seed. "He is very inconvenient that way." The ceremony itself was a ceremony, speeches that remembered to be brief, signatures that promised to be kept, songs that mixed and did not clash. Zhera spoke when asked, then sat and watched the room get made into a future. Outside the viewport, the ship lights made constellations in a geometry that hadn't existed when she was a juvenile killing for a lesson. She was not sentimental. She allowed herself something adjacent. After, she went to a small observation blister at the edge of the ship where the old bolts still had the smell of their first day. She pressed her palm to the glass. The stars refused to move closer. That is their way. She spoke aloud because the air needed to hear it. "You were loud," she said to the absence. "You were foolish. You were a good teacher." Silence answered, steady as weather. It did not disagree. "Your species," she went on, "does not eat the ones you love. You use time like a tool and promises like metal. You hold hands in the dark. It is the strangest and most efficient survival strategy I have ever seen." She closed her eyes. In the dark behind her lids, the ravine opened again. The flare rose. The drones poured. A voice said, "Hold." She held. "Eli Warren," she said, and the name made the ship hum different for a moment, as if all its rivets shifted to listen. "We used it. We kept breathing. We left more than we took. It is very human of us. It is very Vraxxan now, too." A small sound behind her made her turn. The human botanist from Glassdown stood there with dirt under her nails, even in a formal suit. She had a plant in a clear tube, a slender thing with a single stubborn leaf. "I've been looking for you," the botanist said shyly. "We rooted a cutting from the Glassdown grove. It's experimental in space, but I thought, if you wanted, perhaps we could try to grow it in the observation blister. There's enough sunlight here." "Plants like hands and names," Zhera said, surprising herself. "We can give it both." They set the tube in a corner where stray light gathered. The plant did not move. That night, Zhera returned and put her hand near it, not touching. "Grow," she said in her language and in human. "Please." The second word was a human tool she had never liked. It fit better now. Days slid into their reasons. The plant made a second leaf. Zhera brought Vraxxan juveniles to see it and told them the story of water that becomes air and how you don't always have to kill to make a thing live. They were skeptical in the honorable way. That was healthy. Sometimes she dreamed in the old season. She woke wanting to devour. She walked the ship until the wanting turned into something else. On one of those walkings, she found a human male and female arguing softly in a maintenance corridor about a promise. She had taken an extra shift. He had taken her shift once already. Both wanted the other to sleep. They solved it by splitting it and lying together on a crate for a quarter hour, forehead to forehead, eyes closed. Zhera stood very still and watched endurance perform its quiet push-ups. On a mission years later, when the Accord escorted a convoy of refugees through a pocket of extra space that still stank of hunger, they were ambushed by raiders with ships like sharp questions. Zhera led the defense. The raiders bled and ran. One of them was captured, a young ex-host with half-scarred nerve ports and eyes like a trapped mirror. He spat, and the translator made it poetry. "Eat me if you must." Zhera crouched so their eyes were level. She could smell the old hive on him like bad rain. "We do not eat what we choose to keep," she said. "You are under our protection. That means you live long enough to make a different mistake tomorrow." He looked at her as if she had struck him with a soft stone. Later, he declined asylum twice and then accepted it. Years after that, she received a message from a little farm on a moon that had no name when she first fought, just grid coordinates on an ugly map. The message said simply, "I planted trees. They are stubborn. Thank you." She did not reply. Her people do not like to send words into records that can be read by enemies. Instead, she sat with the message in her hand until the paper warmed. Then she went to water the plant in the observation blister. Its leaves brushed her knuckle like gratitude. On the 20th anniversary of Requiem, the Accord held no parade. Someone suggested it. Someone else said that's not how we remember him. The room exhaled and the suggestion died. Instead, throughout the Accord, people did something stubborn and good. They forgave someone who had not asked. They held a silence they did not owe. They fixed a small thing broken for so long it had become part of the furniture. Zhera sat in the engine room for an hour and listened to the ship breathe. She told a young engineer a story about a man who turned his life into a tool and handed it with the handle toward others. "You miss him," the engineer said, fresh and blunt. "I miss the version of myself he made possible," Zhera said without cruelty. "And I miss showing him what he made possible in return." Out the blister, a comet burned a line as thin as a bone scratch across the night. The galaxy is not cured. Piracy remains profitable. Old empires dress in new flags with updated fonts for the same appetites. The Chyr remnant in the Perseid Rip learns patience, which is terrible. A human colony on the rim votes itself into a mistake. A Vraxxan Warren slips back toward rituals that cut girls too soon. The Accord argues with itself as family does, which is a better argument than wars. Through all this, the plant makes leaves. A day came when a distress call reached the Accord from a system no one wanted. A mining rock called Nine Speech, where the air is too thin for songs, the soil too mean for hope. The raiders were back, older and hungrier and led by a man with eyes like winter. The convoy they chewed had no warships. It had women with salt on their skin from old seas, men with hands that knew how to wire a house, children, the elderly, the difficult, the useless, human words for people who need protection the most. Zhera took a small ship with a big engine and 3 fighters who would follow her into the mouth of anything. "This is not council business," she said into comms. "This is mine." At Nine Speech, the raiders made a circle of ships around their prey and tightened. Zhera cut through the circle like a memory of a knife. Her fighters went where she did not have to look to send them. She calmed the raider leader on an open channel and said nothing. He filled the space with boasts. Men like that think sound is victory. When he paused to draw breath, she said softly, "I have eaten men like you," and cut his engines from under him with a shot as clean as a surgeon's decision. He fled in a pod. She let him. He had to live with the knowledge that being spared is a debt. On the convoy flagship, a human male with gray at his temples and a sling on his arm met her on the bay with thanks shaped like common words. She nodded, already turning to go, when a little girl dashed out and tugged her belt. Another ribbon, another impossible knot. "For you," the child said in an accent so thick it needed a machete and a prayer. Zhera knelt. The ribbon was clumsy, the color a pink so aggressive it nearly qualified as strategic. She tied it next to the cloth and the glass-down string. The weight of all three was nothing. It was the heaviest thing she owned. "Do you eat your mates?" the child asked with a scientist's curiosity. "Not anymore," Zhera said. "Why?" "Because I learned to keep what I love," Zhera said, and the child nodded as if that were the most obvious thing in the world. On the way back, Zhera took the long route past the coordinates of Requiem. The ridge was a scar that made weather. She hovered there with engines low. Through the canopy, rain spritzed like the breath of old ghosts. She put her hand against the glass without caring how sentimental it looked if anyone else watched. "I kept my promise," she said. "I keep it every day. I do not always succeed. I do not always want to, but I keep it enough." There was no answer but the ship's, which was to hold, to endure, to hum. Back on the Accord, she walked the long corridor to the observation blister. The plant had thrown a pale bud. It looked like a mouth opening to sing. She sat on the floor and leaned her back against the warm curve of the glass and let herself be tired. The stars did not care. The plant did. The ship did. People did. It is enough. Sometimes on quiet watches, she told the new crew members the story of the thing that started without a plan. She informed them that humans do not eat their mates and that this is stranger than it sounds. She told them about a laugh that cut storms and a promise that welded itself to a reactor core and blew a hole through a hive into a future. She told them and watched them carry it away and spend it badly and brilliantly, which is what stories are for. And when the galaxy, snarling, tried to pull itself back into its old shape of mouths, she stood where it could see her and did the opposite. On a late night that bent toward morning, she dreamt that she stood again at the ravine's lip. The flare rose. The mark presented itself. She moved with a man at her left who was soft and loud and foolish and correct. When she woke, her hand was curled like it had been holding another. She opened it slowly, palm up. It felt like prayer. She placed the plant's pot there, balancing its weight. It steadied. In a small drawer in her quarters, Zhera kept a bone from her first hunt. It had old words carved on it that had made sense in a time when people were teeth. She took out a knife one morning and carved a new line below the old script, human letters in a Vraxxan hand, "We keep." She put the bone back in the drawer with the careful violence of valuing. There were other battles. There always are. She fought them. She lost some. She buried names like seeds, mean soil, too little rain. Some grew anyway. She taught others to fight like gardeners. She learned to rest without guilt sometimes, which is the hardest war. She argued at councils about budgets and feeder lanes and what to do with pirates who surrender and mean it, and then, 3 months later, do not. She won some arguments. She forgave others their winning. She tried to be less clever and more kind and discovered both cost the same in the end. If anyone asked what humans had taught her, she said, "That endurance is not the opposite of grief. It is what grief does when it grows up." If anyone asked what she had taught humans, she said, "That sharpness can be held without cutting what you hold." If anyone asked about mating seasons, she said, "We have better feasts now." When the plant finally flowered, it did so with the quiet of a world learning a new law. The bloom was not dramatic. It was white and ordinary and shaped like the thought you have before you decide to do the brave thing. The botanist cried. Zhera did not. She touched one petal with the back of a claw and then, with a reckless tenderness that would have scandalized her juvenile self, she leaned down and breathed it in. It smelled like old storms forgiving new mornings. The ship's comm chimed with an alert that was not panic, just life happening with urgency. Zhera stood. She checked the ribbon and the cloth and the string. She checked her blade and the weight of her name. She glanced once at the stars like a girl looking back at a home she is leaving by choice. Then she walked toward whatever needed doing next with the calm of someone who understands that victory is a series of small endured moments wearing a coat made of the obvious. And that day, the galaxy learned, humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.